In the 15th century, a ruthless prince ruled a small kingdom caught between two powerful worlds, Christian Europe and the expanding Ottoman Empire. His enemies called him a monster. His people called him a protector. He punished criminals with a method so terrifying that his name would echo across centuries. Thousands died under his rule, their bodies displayed as a warning to anyone who dared challenge his authority. But the truth behind his story is even more disturbing than the legend. This is the story of Vlad the Impaler, the feared ruler who inspired the legend of Dracula. If you enjoy deep historical documentaries like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. We explore the most powerful and mysterious figures in world history. Now, let's uncover the real story behind one of history's most terrifying rulers. In the early 15th century, Wallachia stood at the crossroads of two powerful civilizations. To the north and west lay the Christian kingdoms of Europe, particularly the Kingdom of Hungary. To the south, across the Danube River, rose one of the most powerful empires of the age, the expanding Ottoman Empire. For generations, Wallachia existed as a fragile frontier state, constantly caught between these competing powers. Its rulers were forced to navigate a dangerous political balance, paying tribute to the Ottomans while maintaining alliances with Christian Europe. It was a land where betrayal, shifting loyalties, and sudden violence were part of everyday politics. In 1436, the throne of Wallachia was held by Vlad II, Dracula. Vlad II had joined a powerful chivalric order known as the Order of the Dragon, a brotherhood of rulers dedicated to defending Christianity against Ottoman expansion. Because of this, he became known by the title Dracula, meaning dragon, or in later interpretations, devil. His son would inherit a name derived from it, Dracula, meaning son of Dracula. But ruling Wallachia was never secure. Powerful nobles plotted constantly, and the growing Ottoman Empire demanded loyalty from every ruler along its borders to survive in this brutal political landscape. Vlad II made a difficult decision, one that would change the life of his young son forever. In order to secure peace with the Ottomans, he agreed to send two of his sons as political hostages to the Ottoman court. One of those boys was named Vlad the Impaler, and his years in captivity would shape him into one of the most feared rulers in European history. In the mid-15th century, survival for small kingdoms often depended not on strength, but on submission. The Principality of Wallachia stood directly in the path of expansion by the powerful Ottoman Empire. Its rulers were forced into uneasy agreements, paying tribute, offering loyalty, and sometimes surrendering something far more valuable than gold: children. To secure peace with the Ottomans, Vlad II, Dracula made a decision that would forever shape history. He sent his young sons, Vlad and his younger brother Radu, to the Ottoman court as political hostages. They were not prisoners in chains, but they were not free. Hostages served as guarantees of loyalty. If their father rebelled, the consequences would fall upon them. For the young Vlad the Impaler, this marked the beginning of a childhood surrounded by power, discipline, and fear. The Ottoman court was one of the most sophisticated political centers in the world. Scholars, generals, diplomats, and warriors filled its halls. The boys were educated alongside future leaders of the empire. Vlad encountered a rising prince who would later change world history, Mehmed II, the same ruler who would one day conquer Constantinople and transform the Ottomans into a global empire. The hostages were trained in military tactics, languages and diplomacy, warfare discipline, and court politics. They learned how empires functioned and how absolute authority was maintained. But education came with intimidation. Punishments in the Ottoman system were harsh and public. Discipline was enforced through fear, designed to ensure obedience and loyalty. For some, this environment created admiration. For Vlad, it planted something darker. While Vlad grew increasingly resentful of captivity, his brother Radu adapted to Ottoman life. He learned their customs, embraced their culture, and gained favor within the court. The brothers began to represent two opposing futures: Radu, shaped by integration and diplomacy; Vlad, hardened by resentment and humiliation. This psychological divide would later place them on opposite sides of a war. Historians often debate how deeply these years affected Vlad's later rule. Removed from his homeland at a young age, surrounded by enemies, Vlad grew up where mercy was weakness and fear was power. He learned a crucial lesson. Control was achieved not only through strength, but through terror. While Vlad remained in Ottoman custody, disaster struck back home. In Wallachia, political rivals moved against his father. Nobles rebelled, alliances shifted, and violence erupted. Eventually, Vlad the Dracula was overthrown and killed. Soon after, Vlad's older brother was captured and brutally executed. The young hostage prince learned that his family had been destroyed. Loss replaced loyalty, and captivity turned into vengeance. When Vlad was finally released, he did not return as an innocent noble. He returned as a survivor of imperial politics, a man shaped by betrayal, fear, and the constant threat of death. The boy who entered as a hostage would leave it with a single purpose: to reclaim his homeland and ensure that no one would ever control him again. When Vlad the Impaler finally left the Ottoman court, he did not return home as a prince, welcomed by his people. He returned to a kingdom that no longer belonged to his family. The land of Wallachia had fallen into chaos. Political alliances had shifted, noble families competed for power, and loyalty meant little in a region constantly threatened by invasion. While Vlad had lived as a hostage far from home, tragedy had unfolded in brutal silence. His father, Vlad II, Dracula, had been betrayed and assassinated by rival nobles known as the Boyars. Soon after, Vlad's older brother Mircea was captured, blinded, and buried alive. For the young prince, the message was clear. In Wallachia, mercy did not ensure survival. Power did. The throne, Vlad believed, was his birthright, had already been claimed by rivals backed by foreign powers. Wallachia was no longer ruled by strong kings, but by shifting alliances between Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. Rulers rose quickly and fell even faster. Each prince depended on external support to maintain authority. Vlad now faced a harsh reality. He was a prince without soldiers, without wealth, and without a crown. Determined to reclaim his inheritance, Vlad made his first attempt to seize the throne in 1448. With limited Ottoman backing, he briefly occupied Wallachia, while his rivals were distracted by larger conflicts in the region. But his rule lasted only weeks. Without strong internal support, Vlad was quickly forced into exile. The young prince was forced to flee not once, but repeatedly, moving between courts in Eastern Europe. Exile became Vlad's teacher. He observed how rulers negotiated alliances and how kings manipulated loyalty. He learned patience, he learned strategy, and most importantly, he learned whom not to trust. Historians often point to this period as the turning point in Vlad's personality. The boy who once survived as a hostage was now becoming something else, a man convinced that fear was the only language power understood. To Vlad, instability was not merely political failure, it was personal. For years, Vlad waited. He gathered supporters quietly, built alliances carefully, and watched as rival rulers weakened themselves. Eventually, opportunity arrived. This time, Vlad would not simply claim power, he would reshape Wallachia entirely. And when he returned, the kingdom would learn that its new ruler intended to rule through absolute control. Years of exile had hardened Vlad the Impaler. He had lived as a hostage and watched his family destroyed. He wandered through foreign courts as a prince without a kingdom. But by the early 1450s, opportunity finally appeared. The Principality of Wallachia was once again unstable. Rival rulers struggled to maintain control, and noble factions fought among themselves. Foreign powers competed for influence over the strategic land between Christian Europe and the expanding Ottoman Empire. Into this chaos, Vlad returned. In 1456, Vlad successfully claimed the Wallachian throne. Unlike his earlier attempt, he now understood the true nature of power. Military strength alone was not enough. Loyalty had to be enforced, not requested. The greatest threat to any ruler of Wallachia was not foreign invasion, it was betrayal from within. The Boyars, the powerful nobles who had murdered his father, still held influence. They controlled wealth, local armies, and political alliances. Previous princes had relied on them. Vlad chose a different path. he would break their power completely. Vlad invited many leading boyars to an Easter gathering, presenting himself as a ruler seeking reconciliation. The nobles arrived expecting diplomacy. Instead, Vlad questioned them about their shifting loyalties and their role in the deaths of past rulers, including his own family. By the end of the gathering, many were arrested. Older nobles were executed. Younger ones were forced into brutal labor. They were compelled to rebuild fortresses that would strengthen Vlad's control. It was a calculated act, not revenge alone, but a warning. From that moment forward, Wallachia understood that betrayal would no longer be tolerated. Vlad's rule quickly became legendary for its severity. Crimes that once went unpunished now carried extreme consequences. Stories spread of a golden cup placed in a public square that remained untouched because no one dared steal it. Travelers claimed merchants could cross the country safely, something previously unthinkable in a land plagued by instability. Order had returned, but it came at a terrible price. Punishments were public and unforgettable. Vlad believed fear created obedience faster than mercy ever could. And among all methods of punishment, one would define his legacy: impalement. Execution by impalement was not invented by Vlad, but under his rule it became systematic, transformed into a political language. The purpose was psychological. One impaled body punished a single person. A field of impaled bodies controlled an entire population. Soon, Vlad gained a new title, Vlad Gepek, Vlad the Impaler, a name spoken with horror and fascination. Under Vlad's authority, Wallachia changed dramatically. Central power strengthened. Noble influence weakened. Law became absolute. To many of his subjects, he was a ruler who restored justice in a land long consumed by corruption and chaos. But Vlad's methods ensured one thing above all: no one could ignore him, and his growing reputation would soon reach the most powerful ruler in the region, Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople himself. A confrontation between prince and empire was now inevitable. By the late 1450s, the rule of Vlad the Impaler had brought stability to Wallachia, but peace came with a growing cost. For years, Wallachian rulers had paid tribute to the expanding Ottoman Empire: gold, resources, and loyalty offered in exchange for survival. Vlad understood what tribute truly meant: submission, and unlike the princes before him, he refused to bow. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II expected obedience from frontier states. Wallachia was strategically vital, a buffer between Ottoman territory and Christian Europe. When Ottoman envoys arrived demanding tribute and submission, Vlad responded with calculated defiance. According to chronicles, when ambassadors refused to remove their turbans before him, Vlad ordered them nailed to their heads. Whether fully accurate or partly legend, the story spread rapidly, shaping his reputation as a ruler who feared no empire. Diplomacy had ended. War had begun. Rather than waiting for invasion, Vlad launched preemptive strikes south of the Danube River into Ottoman-controlled lands. His forces moved swiftly through villages and military outposts, destroying supply lines and spreading panic. These were not conventional battles. They were psychological operations. Night attacks and sudden disappearances made it impossible for Ottoman commanders to predict his movements. Reports claimed thousands were killed during these raids. But Vlad's true weapon was not the sword. It was terror. Vlad understood a brutal truth of warfare. Smaller armies rarely defeat empires through strength alone. They win by breaking morale. Captured enemies were impaled and displayed along roads, warnings visible long before armies arrived. Travelers described forests of wooden stakes rising from the earth, each bearing a silent message. This land would not submit. The displays were designed to invade the enemy's mind before battle even began. In response, Sultan Mehmed II assembled a massive army and marched toward Wallachia in 1462. Facing overwhelming odds, Vlad avoided direct confrontation. Instead, he adopted scorched earth tactics: crops burned, wells poisoned, villages abandoned, supplies destroyed. The invading army advanced through a land deliberately emptied of resources. Hunger, disease, and fear followed them. As the Ottoman army approached Targovik, they encountered a sight that stunned even hardened soldiers. Thousands of bodies stretched across the fields. Massive spectacle of death meant to confront the invaders with the cost of conquest, Chroniclers claimed even Mehmed, the second conqueror of Constantinople, was shaken by the scene. Victory against such an enemy suddenly seemed uncertain. The battlefield had become psychological theater. Militarily, Vlad could not defeat the Ottomans outright, but he achieved something equally powerful. He slowed their advance and transformed himself into a figure larger than life, a ruler whose reputation fought alongside his army. Fear became his shield. To his enemies, he appeared merciless. To supporters, he was the defender, willing to preserve independence. Yet terror carries consequences. The same brutality that frightened enemies also unsettled allies. And soon, Vlad would discover that survival against an empire was easier than surviving political betrayal. By 1462, the conflict between Vlad the Impaler and the mighty Ottoman Empire had escalated beyond raids and retaliation. Now, the empire itself moved to crush him. Sultan Mehmed II marched north with one of the largest armies in the region. Estimates vary, but chroniclers describe tens of thousands of soldiers advancing toward Wallachia, a sea of steel and silk. Against such overwhelming force, Vlad understood a simple truth. A traditional battle meant certain defeat, so he chose a different kind of war. As Ottoman troops crossed into Wallachia, they found no welcoming cities, no supplies, and no easy victories. Vlad ordered a scorched earth strategy. Fields were burned before harvest, livestock driven away or slaughtered. Wells were poisoned to deny water. Villages were abandoned under cover of darkness. The land itself became hostile. Ottoman soldiers advanced through smoke and silence, exhausted by hunger and disease, long before meeting Vlad's army. This was not warfare meant to win quickly. It was warfare meant to exhaust an empire. Knowing he could not survive a prolonged invasion, Vlad planned a bold and desperate strike. Under cover of darkness in June 1462, Wallachian forces launched a surprise assault on the Ottoman camp near Targovekt. The objective was clear: kill the Sultan himself. Vlad's soldiers attacked tents and struck officers before disappearing back into the night. Confusion spread rapidly. In darkness, Ottoman soldiers struggled to distinguish friend from enemy. Fires erupted and horses panicked. Though Vlad narrowly missed killing Mehmed II, the attack achieved its true goal: psychological shock. The empire realized it faced an enemy willing to risk everything. After the night attack, Vlad avoided large-scale confrontation. Instead, his forces relied on ambushes along forest paths. Every movement of the invading army was harassed. Sleep became impossible. Safety felt temporary. The psychological pressure mirrored the terror Vlad had deliberately cultivated. Through his legendary displays of psychological warfare, the battlefield existed not only in fields and forests, but inside the minds of soldiers. Despite his ingenuity, Vlad's position grew increasingly fragile. The Ottomans possessed greater manpower and deeper resources. Worse still, they had another advantage. Vlad's own brother, Radu Selfrumos, marched alongside the invading forces. Where Vlad ruled through fear, Radu offered stability. Many nobles, exhausted by war, began shifting loyalty. The greatest danger to Vlad was no longer the invading army, but the erosion of support within his own kingdom. Although Mehmed II eventually withdrew his main forces, Vlad's situation did not improve. Wallachia was devastated. Fear had saved the kingdom from immediate conquest, but it had also isolated its ruler. Soon betrayal would succeed where armies had failed. The war against the Ottoman Empire had not destroyed Vlad the Impaler, but politics would succeed where armies had failed. By the end of 1462, Wallachia was exhausted. Villages lay burned, trade disrupted, and nobles feared endless conflict. Vlad's brutal methods had protected independence, yet they had also created fear among his own allies. Fear rarely produced loyalty for long. As Ottoman pressure continued, many Wallachian Bojars began reconsidering their allegiance. The Ottomans offered an alternative. Vlad's younger brother, Radu. To war-weary elites, submission appeared safer than resistance. Gradually, Vlad's support eroded, leaving him isolated within his own kingdom. Desperate, Vlad turned westward to Matthias Corvinus. Believing his years fighting the Ottomans proved his loyalty to Christendom, but King Matthias faced his own pressures. financial strain, and the complex balance of power between Christian kingdoms and the Ottomans. Supporting Vlad meant a costly war. Instead of aid, Vlad was arrested, accused of treachery through questionable, possibly forged letters. The feared prince disappeared through betrayal. For years, he remained in captivity within Hungary, while Europe moved on without him. During his imprisonment, stories spread. The newly expanding printing press allowed pamphlets to circulate, describing Vlad as a sadistic tyrant. Political propaganda transformed a complex ruler into a symbol of horror. Ironically, while powerless, his legend grew stronger than ever. He was no longer merely a prince. He was becoming a myth. Vlad's imprisonment lasted more than a decade. By the mid-1470s, political circumstances shifted. Christian rulers needed experienced commanders against renewed Ottoman pressure. Vlad was finally released. The prince would be given one final chance to reclaim his throne. But time had moved on. After more than a decade of imprisonment, the name of Vlad the Impaler had not disappeared from Europe. It had grown into legend. But legends do not rule kingdoms. By the mid-1470s, Eastern Europe once again faced renewed pressure from the expanding Ottoman Empire. Christian rulers needed experienced commanders who understood Ottoman warfare, men hardened by survival on the frontier. Despite his terrifying reputation, Vlad was still one of the few leaders who had successfully resisted imperial invasion. And so, after years in captivity, he was released. He was given one final chance. When Vlad returned toward Wallachia, he found a land very different from the one he had ruled. Political loyalties had shifted repeatedly. Princes came and went, alliances dissolved quickly, and the population had endured decades of instability. The fear that once secured his authority no longer guaranteed obedience. Vlad was no longer the unstoppable ruler of the past. He was a returning claimant fighting against time itself. With Hungarian and regional support, he launched a campaign to reclaim the throne once more. In 1476, he succeeded. For the third time in his life, Vlad became ruler of Wallachia. But victory came too late. His final reign lasted only months. Wallachia remained caught between larger powers, and Ottoman forces quickly moved to restore control. Vlad faced enemies, both external and internal, rival nobles, foreign armies, and lingering distrust created by his earlier rule. Resources were limited. Allies were uncertain. Still, Vlad chose resistance. He gathered what forces he could and marched to confront advancing Ottoman troops. Details of Vlad's final battle remain unclear, lost within conflicting chronicles and fragmented records. Some accounts claim he fought bravely at the front lines, refusing retreat despite overwhelming odds. Others suggest betrayal once again played a role, that allies abandoned him during combat, leaving him exposed. What is certain is this: sometime in late 1476, Vlad was killed in battle. The feared ruler fell not as a prisoner, but as a warrior. Even in death, uncertainty followed him. Different sources offer competing stories. He may have been killed by Ottoman soldiers during combat. He may have been mistakenly slain by his own troops in confusion. Some legends claim assassination, arranged by political rivals. His body was reportedly decapitated, and his head sent to Sultan Mehmed II as proof. The man who had used fear as a weapon became, in the end, a symbol displayed to reassure an empire. Yet death did not silence his story. With Vlad gone, Wallachia continued its turbulent existence between empires. New rulers emerged, alliances shifted again, and history moved forward. But something unusual had already begun. Stories about Vlad spread far beyond Eastern Europe. Travelers, merchants, and writers carried tales of impalements, cruelty, and supernatural endurance into Western Europe. The real prince was fading. The myth was beginning, and centuries later, imagination would transform a medieval ruler into one of the most famous figures in global culture. The death of Vlad the Impaler in 1476 should have ended his story. Kings die, wars end. New rulers replace the old. But Vlad's story refused to disappear. Instead, it evolved. What began as history slowly transformed into legend, and eventually into myth. In the decades following Vlad's death, Europe entered a new age of communication. The printing press allowed stories to spread faster than ever before. Pamphlets circulated across German-speaking regions describing Vlad's rule in shocking detail. These texts portrayed him as a ruler of unimaginable cruelty. Feasts surrounded by impaled victims, mass executions without mercy, punishments designed to inspire terror. Some accounts were based on real events. Others were exaggerated or entirely invented. Political propaganda played a major role. Rival powers had reasons to portray Vlad as a monster. The man who once fought to preserve independence became a cautionary tale. Interestingly, not all stories condemned him. In parts of Eastern Europe, Vlad appeared as a strict defender of justice, a ruler who punished corruption and protected ordinary people from lawlessness. This dual image emerged. In Western Europe, a sadistic tyrant. In Eastern tradition, a harsh but necessary protector. History had split into competing narratives, and somewhere between them lay the real Vlad impossible to fully recover. More than 4 centuries later, a writer searching for inspiration would unknowingly immortalize Vlad's name. In 1897, Irish author Bram Stoker published the novel Dracula. Stoker researched folklore and encountered references to a figure named Dracula, derived from Vlad's father's title, meaning son of the dragon. The name fascinated him. The fictional vampire shared little with the real prince, but the association was powerful enough to merge history and imagination forever. Vlad the ruler became linked with Dracula, the immortal vampire. The transformation reveals something profound about human storytelling. People remember emotion more than accuracy. Vlad's brutal methods, dramatic wars, and mysterious death created a narrative too compelling to remain confined to history books. Fear amplified memory. Legend replaced nuance. Over centuries, the historical prince faded behind the shadow of fiction. Today, millions recognize Dracula, while far fewer know the real ruler who inspired the name. Yet Vlad's true legacy remains complex. He was a hostage shaped by trauma, a prince fighting for survival between empires, a ruler who used terror as governance, a symbol interpreted differently by every generation. Hero to some, monster to others. History rarely offers simple heroes or villains. The story of Vlad the Impaler reminds us that legends are not born from perfection, but from conflict, fear, and survival. A prince fought to hold his kingdom together. An empire sought to erase him. And centuries later, the world remembers him not only as a man, but as an immortal legend. The line between history and myth is often written in blood and remembered in stories.